There are moments in life when everything seems to fall apart. What once felt familiar becomes strange. What once gave comfort now feels empty. It is in these moments that many begin to question, has God forgotten me? Why do I feel so distant from Him? Yet, this very feeling, this deep and painful emptiness, is often not a sign of abandonment, but of divine preparation. Before God gives something big, He often allows the soul to experience a season of being emptied. Not because the person has done something wrong, but because the weight of what is coming demands space within. Imagine a vessel filled to the brim with stagnant water. If you were to pour in something fresh, something pure, it would only mix and be polluted by what was already there. So, the vessel must be poured out. Not a drop can remain. The cleansing may feel like loss, but it is in fact grace. That emptiness is not punishment, it is preparation. The soul cannot receive what it has no room to hold, and God, in His infinite wisdom, does not give in fragments what He intends to give in fullness. In such seasons, the soul often finds itself in silence. The prayers feel dry, the words seem hollow, and the heavens appear silent. But in this silence, something deeper is taking place. The external voices that once distracted are being quieted. The dependence on circumstances is being dismantled, and the inner life is being awakened. The silence is not without purpose. It is not void. It is full of intention. God is working in the background, rearranging the unseen, creating a foundation within that can carry the weight of what is coming. This emptiness is also where idols are exposed. The things we once leaned on, people, positions, pleasures, are revealed for what they truly are: temporary comforts that cannot satisfy an eternal soul. When God is about to do something big, He often strips away those crutches, not to cause pain, but to bring clarity. He wants us to lean on Him alone, not because He is insecure or demanding, but because He knows that only He can sustain the greatness He is about to give. During this time, the soul may feel fragile. It may question its identity, its purpose, its direction. This vulnerability is sacred, for in weakness, true strength is revealed. In questions, deeper truths are discovered. When the soul is emptied, it begins to hunger, not for what the world offers, but for what is eternal. This hunger is not a flaw. It is the first sign of awakening. God is drawing the soul back to Himself, not with force, but with quiet longing. There is also a hidden protection in this emptiness. Often, when we are full of our own plans, we rush into things not meant for us. But when God empties us, He slows us down. He shields us from distractions disguised as blessings. The delay we feel is actually a wall of mercy. The confusion we sense is often a barrier between us and what would have harmed us. In this way, the emptiness becomes a sanctuary, a place where the noise of the world fades and the whispers of heaven can be heard again. It is important to remember that God does not waste pain. Every tear, every lonely night, every silent prayer becomes part of a divine story. The soul is being refined like gold in fire. The clutter is being removed. The heart is being stretched, and though it feels like loss, it is really growth. The person you are becoming in this emptiness is the person who will be able to carry what is coming. Not with pride, but with humility. Not with fear, but with faith. This divine emptiness is not the end of the story. It is the beginning. The deeper the void, the greater the capacity for fullness. And when God chooses to fill that space, it will not be with something small. He never empties without the intent to pour. But he always waits until the soul is truly ready, until it is no longer clinging to the old, no longer demanding explanations, but quietly trusting the process. So, when you find yourself in a season of emptiness, don't rush to escape it. Don't fill the silence with noise. Instead, be still. Let the emptiness do its work. For what feels like absence may be the very evidence of his nearness. And what feels like loss may be the sacred beginning of something bigger than you've dared to hope. There are times when hope appears in the most unlikely of places, emerging not from blessings, but from barrenness, not from answers, but from silence. This kind of hope does not come from visible evidence or favorable circumstances. Instead, it arrives uninvited, almost irrational, but unmistakably real. When God is about to do something big in a person's life, one of the clearest signs is the sudden presence of an unshakable hope that defies the situation at hand. It is not the kind of hope that we manufacture by positive thinking or motivational phrases. Rather, it feels like it's been planted inside us by hands not our own. This hope may begin as a whisper, not loud or dramatic, but steady. Almost like the quiet confidence of someone who knows something no one else does. The world may look unchanged. The trials may still be present. Prayers may still feel unanswered. But beneath all of that, something begins to shift. The heart starts to anticipate something, even when the mind can't understand why. It is a sense that God is near, that something is moving, that the waiting is not in vain. And this feeling cannot be explained to others, because from the outside, everything still appears the same, or even worse. People around you might not see any reason for your hope. They might even suggest that it's foolish. But hope given by God doesn't require outside validation. It is not rooted in evidence. It is rooted in relationship. This hope is born out of spiritual intimacy, the kind that is developed in silence, in surrender, and in trust. Even if the outward signs say, nothing is happening, the soul begins to say, something is coming, and somehow you believe it. Not blindly, but with a faith that sees what the eyes cannot. This is not optimism, it is revelation. This kind of hope often comes in contradiction to how things feel. You may feel exhausted, worn down, and even doubtful, yet still find yourself drawn toward the future, as though something is waiting for you just beyond your current reach. This tension between the pain of the present and the promise of what's coming is part of the process. It's what gives this hope its weight. If hope only existed in joyful seasons, it would be cheap. But when hope rises in the middle of loss, hardship, or delay, it carries with it a sacred strength. There are moments when this hope shows up in unexpected forms. A scripture you've read 100 times suddenly speaks directly to your spirit. A line in a sermon feels aimed right at your heart. A dream lingers in your mind and refuses to fade. A simple word of encouragement from a stranger feels almost prophetic. These moments may seem small to others, but to you, they feel charged with meaning. It's as though God is breathing reassurance into you, not with thunder or lightning, but with a quiet nod that says, "Hold on, I am not finished yet." The beauty of this kind of hope is that it doesn't depend on how strong you feel. In fact, it often arrives when you are weakest. It doesn't demand certainty or proof. It only asks for belief. And that belief begins to affect how you move through the world. You start making space for what hasn't yet arrived. You prepare your heart, your mindset, your habits, as if what you are waiting for is already on the way. That is the true power of divine hope. It pulls your life forward, even while circumstances seem to hold you back. Hope like this also changes how you pray. You may not have all the words, but your spirit begins to posture itself with expectation. You ask not out of desperation, but out of trust. Your prayers become less frantic and more focused. You start thanking God before anything has changed. Not because you're pretending, but because you truly believe that what He promised is coming. This is the hope that births patience, perseverance, and preparation. It is the signal that God is moving, even when nothing else seems to be. When such hope takes root, it becomes impossible to ignore. It may not remove the pain, but it gives the pain purpose. It may not shorten the wait, but it gives the waiting meaning. And in time, you begin to realize that this hope was not simply pointing you toward the blessing. It was becoming the foundation upon which the blessing would stand. When God is preparing to give something big, one of the most mysterious and powerful signs is a sudden clarity that arises in the midst of chaos. At first glance, the situation may seem completely disordered. Everything appears to be moving in different directions. Nothing aligns, and your mind is overwhelmed with questions that have no immediate answers. Yet, within this chaos, something subtle begins to form. A pattern, a sense of direction, a quiet understanding that defies logic. It's not that your circumstances change instantly, but rather your perception begins to shift. You begin to see glimpses of order within the disorder, threads of meaning woven into what once felt like meaningless confusion. This clarity does not come all at once. It rarely arrives with a full explanation or roadmap. Instead, it breaks through in moments, quiet revelations that catch you off guard. You may be in the middle of a storm emotionally, mentally, or spiritually, and then suddenly a thought, a realization, or a perspective enters your heart, giving you just enough light to take the next step. It's as though a fog is lifting just a little, revealing enough to remind you that God is still writing your story, even if the pages seem scattered. That sliver of light, that brief understanding, becomes an anchor in the confusion. Often, this clarity reveals itself not in answers, but in awareness. You start to notice that certain patterns in your life weren't accidental after all. A disappointment that crushed you now begins to look like protection. A loss that wounded you starts to feel like preparation. A closed door that once felt like rejection begins to resemble a divine detour. You begin to see that your past and your present are not disjointed pieces, but rather parts of a greater narrative that's unfolding with precision beyond your comprehension. In this process, your spirit becomes more aware of God's fingerprints. Things you once dismissed as coincidences now appear as intentional signs. Conversations, scripture verses, memories, even the timing of events start to feel less random. You realize that the chaos isn't working against you. It's working on you. The very instability you feared is becoming the environment where your faith is refined, your heart is softened, and your mind is awakened. And through all this, you're not becoming more confused. You're becoming more clear, about what matters, who you are, and most importantly, who God is. The beauty of this kind of clarity is that it does not depend on circumstances improving. It can exist in the middle of delay, in the middle of heartbreak, in the middle of not knowing what comes next. That's what makes it so divine. If clarity only came when things were going well, it wouldn't require trust. But when God begins to whisper direction, while everything around you still looks uncertain, it means He is drawing you closer, teaching you how to hear His voice in the storm. It is this clarity, not in facts but in faith, that starts to rise above the noise. This clarity begins to reorder your priorities, the things that once consumed your energy. Worrying about approval, chasing temporary satisfaction, dwelling on the opinions of others, begin to fade. You begin to see what's worth keeping and what's meant to be let go. This is not something you force. It simply unfolds as your heart grows in awareness of God's timing and purpose. Even in the middle of unanswered questions, there's a growing sense that you are being led, not left behind. Sometimes this clarity comes through pain. Sometimes it comes through stillness. Other times it arrives unexpectedly, in the middle of an ordinary day. But however it comes, it carries a peace that cannot be manufactured. It brings a quiet confidence that you're not walking in circles. You're walking through a process. That process, while messy on the surface, is being guided by hands that see the full picture. You may not be able to explain it to anyone else. You may not even be able to explain it to yourself fully. But deep within, you know something has changed. You're not trying to figure everything out anymore. You're learning to follow. You're not depending on external signs alone. You're beginning to trust the internal clarity God is forming within you. And that clarity becomes the compass that leads you to the very thing He is preparing to give. When God is preparing to release something significant into your life, one of the most confusing yet spiritually meaningful signs is the closing of doors without warning or explanation. These are the moments when opportunities that once seemed promising suddenly vanish. Relationships that once felt essential begin to dissolve, and paths you were certain about become blocked or inaccessible. At first, it feels like loss. It feels like failure, rejection, or even divine silence. The mind begins to question everything. Was I wrong? Did I miss the will of God? Why would He lead me here only to shut it down? But as time unfolds, what becomes clear is that these closed doors were not accidents. They were intentional acts of divine redirection. There is something sacred about the way God removes what is not meant for us. Often, we chase things out of habit, desire pressure, or fear of missing out. We latch onto roles, places, or people because they once made sense or fulfilled a need. But when God is about to do something big, He starts clearing the space where that blessing will land. He doesn't just remove distractions. He removes attachments that are too small for the new thing He's bringing. And this pruning process is rarely easy. It stirs emotions, rattles assumptions, and stretches our faith to the edge. Many of these doors close without dramatic warning. A job offer falls through. A relationship slowly fades. A dream that once burned bright in your heart suddenly feels distant and unreachable. And the worst part is that there's no clear explanation. You don't get a vision or voice telling you why. You're left with the quiet ache of uncertainty, carrying the weight of something unfinished. Yet in that unfinished place, God begins to work with precision. The doors are not just closing randomly. They are being shut with purpose, not to limit you, but to guide you. We often see these closed doors as the end of something, but God sees them as the protection of something greater. He sees what you can't. He sees years down the road. He sees the weight of what you are asking for, and He knows what your heart and character can carry right now. Sometimes, the door closes not because the destination is wrong, but because the timing is, or the foundation beneath you is not yet ready to sustain what He intends to build. So, rather than giving a good thing too soon, He closes the door and waits until your readiness and His plan align. There is a deep trust that forms in the season of closed doors. When nothing makes sense, and yet you choose to believe that God is working, you begin to mature spiritually. You stop defining His goodness by how many blessings you can see, and start recognizing His wisdom in what He withholds. Closed doors teach the soul to surrender. They train the heart to let go of control and depend not on outcomes but on obedience. You may not understand why, but you learn to walk forward anyway, knowing that the one who shut that door is still guiding your steps. As more doors close, the path begins to narrow. It may feel isolating, but in that narrowing, your clarity increases. You no longer chase everything. You begin to focus on what truly matters. Your faith sharpens, your identity deepens, and your ears become more attuned to God's whisper. This process creates space not just externally but internally. You become less anxious, less driven by validation, and more centered in purpose. You're no longer trying to open every door you see. You're learning to wait for the one God opens with His own hand. Sometimes, the final closed door is the one that reveals the open one. After all the frustration, waiting, and wondering, one door will open so effortlessly, so clearly, that you'll understand why the others had to shut. It won't feel forced or uncertain. It will carry peace. It will align with the lessons you've learned, the strength you've gained, and the person you've become in the waiting. The closed doors weren't detours. They were part of the architecture of your journey. They were shaping you for something you couldn't see then, but will one day step into with grace, gratitude, and deep understanding. There are moments in life when the soul becomes unusually sensitive to the unseen. This sensitivity doesn't come through effort or study, nor does it announce itself with noise. It arrives quietly, almost mysteriously. You begin to notice that the ordinary moments of life start to carry extraordinary weight. A single verse from Scripture feels as if it was written just for you. A passing conversation strikes your heart in a way you can't explain. Even the wind through the trees or a line in a song might bring tears to your eyes. This is not sentimentality. It is a spiritual awakening. It is one of the signs that God is preparing you to receive something greater than what you've ever known before. This increased spiritual sensitivity is not about becoming overly emotional or mystical. It's about becoming more aware of the voice behind the silence, more aware of the fingerprints of God on the events of your life. Where once you may have overlooked a moment, now you pause and feel it. You sense there's something sacred in it. This awareness is not something you can fake. It is a work of the Spirit. It is as if the veil between the visible and invisible thins, just enough for your heart to know there is more going on than what your eyes can see. You start to notice that you're drawn to things that feed your soul and repelled by things that used to entertain, but now feel empty. The words of Scripture feel alive. You reread a familiar passage, and this time it breaks you in a way it never did before. It comforts, convicts, and calls you all at once. Sermons seem to echo your private prayers. Someone you barely know says something that answers a question you haven't dared to ask out loud. These are not coincidences. They are gentle signs of alignment. God is tuning your heart to His frequency, helping you recognize His voice in places you once ignored. Even your dreams may begin to feel different. Not all of them, but some. A scene or symbol from your sleep lingers into your day, stirring your spirit, prompting reflection. You start waking up with a sense that God is trying to get your attention, not to confuse you, but to prepare you. This preparation doesn't always come with clarity, but it comes with conviction. Something is shifting. You feel it, even if you can't explain it. This is not the time to dismiss your emotions or brush off your instincts. This is the time to lean in. There is a kind of hunger that comes with this sensitivity. A craving to be in God's presence more often, to sit longer in stillness, to speak less and listen more. The world continues around you, no louder than before. But somehow your inner world becomes quieter, more attuned. You realize that what you need is not in more activity, but in more awareness. You stop praying only for answers and begin praying for understanding, for nearness, for whatever it takes to not miss what God is saying. And even though you don't yet have what you're waiting for, you start to treasure the waiting itself because you sense that God is nearer in it. Your relationships may begin to shift. Some people feel drawn to you not for what you can give, but for the peace and depth they feel when around you. Others may drift away, not because of conflict, but because the direction of your heart is changing. You're being set apart, not in isolation, but in refinement. God is removing the noise so you can hear more clearly, and in the stillness He speaks, not always in sentences, but in impressions, in peace, in moments that stop you and make you realize, He's here. This spiritual sensitivity doesn't make you more perfect. It doesn't shield you from difficulty. But it does give you eyes to see through difficulty into the deeper work being done. You begin to recognize patterns and movements that point to God's involvement in even the smallest details. Your heart becomes like soft clay, easily shaped, easily moved, and more ready than ever to receive. You may still feel uncertain about the future, but you no longer feel alone in the journey. Something is coming. You don't know when or how, but you know it's Him. And knowing that changes everything. There are few things as difficult to accept as delay, especially when your heart is full of hope and your hands feel ready. You've waited, prayed, prepared, and still nothing seems to move forward. Doors stay closed, answers remain distant, and time stretches longer than your expectations ever allowed for. It is in this space, between readiness and fulfillment, that the most silent work of God takes place. And though it may seem like He's withholding what you've asked for, in truth, He's weaving something deeper into your soul. When God is about to give you something big, delay is not a denial. It is a divine pause with a divine purpose. At first, the delay feels frustrating. You question whether you misheard him, whether your desires were too bold, or whether you're being overlooked. The mind fills with possibilities, most of them negative. Doubt begins to whisper. You start to compare your timeline with others, wondering why their prayers seem to be answered faster, why their lives seem to unfold more smoothly. But beneath the surface of that frustration, a quiet transformation begins. The delay is not a passive waiting. It is a test, a tool, and a teacher. It refines the heart in ways that success never could. During the delay, you come face to face with your dependence on control. You realize how much of your peace was tied to your schedule, how tightly you gripped the outcomes you desired. And one by one, those illusions fall away. You are left with something far more real than a plan. You are left with trust. Real trust. The kind that exists without evidence. The kind that whispers, "Even if I don't understand, I still believe he is good." This kind of trust is forged, not gifted. It's built in the furnace of delay, where emotions rise and fall, but faith learns to stand. There's also a shift in your prayers. At the beginning of the delay, your prayers are full of urgency and requests for breakthrough. But as time passes, they begin to change. You start praying less for outcomes and more for alignment. You ask not just for open doors, but for the strength to wait well. You begin to value not just the blessing, but the process that is shaping you into someone who can carry it. Your perspective widens. You begin to see that the waiting itself is not empty. It is filled with preparation. The delay also reveals what your heart truly desires. Sometimes we ask for things that we are not yet ready to receive, not because the thing is too big, but because we have not yet grown into the version of ourselves who can handle it. The delay creates room for that growth. It highlights your insecurities, your fears, your hidden motives, and gives you space to deal with them before the blessing arrives. God cares not only about what you receive, but who you become as you receive it. That is why he delays. Not to frustrate you, but to protect what he's building both in you and for you. There are hidden treasures in this season, unexpected lessons, deepened relationships, new insights, a better understanding of yourself and of God. None of it is wasted. You may not notice it daily, but when you look back, you'll see that you were changing even when the scenery stayed the same. The delay forced you to sit with your soul, to examine your faith, to find peace without answers. That kind of maturity cannot be rushed. It is slow, cooked, not microwaved, and its flavor lingers far longer than anything instant ever could. Sometimes the delay is the blessing, because when what you've waited for finally comes, it will not find you anxious or desperate. It will find you prepared, and you'll carry it with grace, humility, and gratitude. You'll know its worth, not because it came easily, but because it was birthed in patience. You will no longer be the person who begged for the gift. You will be the person who became strong enough to steward it well. That is what delay does. It grows you. It humbles you. And above all, it draws you closer to the one who holds time in his hands and never arrives too late. When God is preparing to give you something big, he rarely begins with the gift itself. Instead, he begins with you. He empties you to make room, stirs hope where it makes no sense, gives you clarity in the middle of confusion, closes doors to protect you, awakens your spiritual senses, and teaches you how to wait with faith instead of frustration. Every step of the process may feel like delay, loss, or silence, but it is none of those things. It is divine construction. God is not just building the blessing. He is building the person who can carry it. And when the time is right, you will not only receive what you prayed for, you will be ready for it. Shaped by every hidden moment, He used to prepare your heart for something greater than you imagined. What if the silence you're hearing, the delays you're facing, and the closed doors you're mourning aren't signs that God has forgotten you, but signs that He's preparing you for something far greater than you've ever imagined? Sometimes, before heaven delivers the blessing, it sends subtle signs, and if you're paying attention, you'll begin to see them, not with your eyes, but with your spirit.